The last year and 8 months of talking about Cardano and crypto and policy and everything else has been a little like watching people driving very expensive exotic cars down this tunnel. You're standing there, you see this happening, you know those are train tracks. So you yell out, "Hey, don't drive down that tunnel. That's where the train smashes you." But the people in the cars saw that there were a whole bunch of other cars in the tunnel, and they thought to themselves that surely they couldn't be in any real danger if this many other people had made the same choice. That safety of the herd was like a warm, comforting blanket right up until they saw the train's headlights and heard its sudden whistle. And only then did they realize they had all been on a collision course with a speeding locomotive the entire time. Ready? Let's go. Today, we are going to discuss one very important event, the ominous and very bad ruling that dropped today in the LBRY case, and what it might mean for projects in Cardano and in the wider crypto ecosystem. If you heard today's intro and thought to yourself, I'm a ghost car bro, trains see me in a dark tunnel and they run the opposite direction. Or if you're finding value in these videos each weekday, please consider delegating to the Army of Spies stake pool, ticker AOS. You will no doubt remember that for a very long time on this channel, we've been talking about how crypto and the Howey test were on a collision course. This poster put it well recently when he said either crypto breaks Howey or Howey breaks crypto. We talked about this when he posted this not that long ago, about a week ago. It was true then, it was true a year ago, it was true 2 years ago, and it was true today. If Howey and crypto were on a collision course, the beginning of that collision started happening just today. I've been saying for a long time the Howey test is far too outdated and it's got to go. The Howey test was written in 1946. The justice who wrote the opinion in Howey, Frank Murphy, he was born before the Wright brothers flew at Kitty Hawk. This dude was born before airplanes were really a thing. Do you think he could have possibly contemplated a future of crypto and blockchains and DeFi and metaverse projects? He had no idea he was creating a standard that would be applied to such things in 2022. We've got to move past this outdated and aged test. This is like if we wrote some divorce laws in 2022 and then some court in the year 3000 was trying to apply it to a divorce between two AI-based holograms or something. It's about the same distance in time. You might be aware that that is absolutely not how courts look at it. They don't think to themselves, hey, we might be making rules that will apply to holograms or AI persons in the year 3000. They think to themselves, hey, we have to interpret the laws, and in doing so, we must apply precedent. Unfortunately, that led to a lot of us waking up this morning and seeing this news from LBRY. We lost. Sorry, everyone. If you don't know what LBRY is, LBRY runs this platform, Odyssey, which is basically like, you can think of it as like crypto YouTube. And it can also host other types of media like this text file that happens to be the decision in this case. So what did LBRY do that made the SEC so angry? Well, LBRY had a token for their platform called the LBC token, and there were supposed to be around 1 billion of these LBC tokens, but they pre-mined 400 million. They put that into 3 buckets. They put 200 million into a community fund, 100 million into an institutional fund, and another 100 million into an operational fund. By the time of this decision, they had spent about half of all that pre-mined LBC. They had sold some to Flipside Crypto, Shapeshift, and CoinX. They had sold some to the public directly through LBRY applications, and also through various digital asset trading platforms. They had something going on with some kind of debt financing, and they also used some of it to compensate employees and contractors. This is all pretty typical stuff. When you see that pie chart in the tokenomics of projects in Cardano or in any of their crypto ecosystem, you'll often see something like 20% of the tokens sort of carved out for the team, for operations, for community development, for marketing, for market making exchanges, all these reasons. But there's always this chunk that's kind of carved out, and it doesn't go to the public the way the rest of the coins go. So the SEC said, hey, we think you violated Section 5 of the Securities Act because we believe you offered or sold securities in interstate commerce without filing a registration statement. If we break that down, it's pretty straightforward. Did you offer or sell securities across state lines without having filed a registration statement with us? So obviously, the really important operative word here is security. Was what they definitely seem to have sold some things. Were those things, these LBC tokens, were they securities? Of course, LBRY is saying they're not. SEC is saying they are. And so the judge goes back to our 80-year-old standard, the Howey test. By way of very quick review, I think a lot of times we talk about Howey as having 4 prongs, but this New Hampshire district court is in the First Circuit, where they sort of combine what a lot of people would call prongs 3 and 4 into a single prong 3. So here are their 3 prongs. You have to, in order for something to be a security, you have to have, or an investment contract, which is called a security in Howey, you have to have an investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits to be derived solely from the efforts of the promoter or a third party. And right here is usually where we cut it off and say this is the start of the 4th prong. But again, we're in New Hampshire, First Circuit. They're saying they're 3 prongs. So we're going to talk about in terms of these 3 prongs. So before we get to the parts that are just going to enrage everybody, let's talk about what this actually is. This is a ruling on a motion for summary judgment. What does that mean? I'll give you the very, very easy non-technical version. The court is going to say that to themselves, I must determine whether either of the parties deserves judgment as a matter of law on facts that are not disputed. So they're going to take all the facts and they're going to throw out the facts where the SEC and LBRY don't agree. They're going to look at the things that they both agree on. They both agree. This set of facts, we both agree on those. There's no dispute as to these facts. Then they're going to take those facts and they're going to do the court's job, apply the law to those facts. And they're going to say, are these agreed upon facts enough to determine that the things that LBRY was selling were in fact securities, and this was a seller offering in violation of our securities laws? Because you already know that LBRY lost, it'll be no surprise to you to see in the conclusion, the SEC's motion for summary judgment is granted. The SEC won. But the disturbing part is how the court came to that decision. So if we go back to our First Circuit 3 prongs of the Howey test instead of 4, we see we've got investment of money in a common enterprise with an expectation of profits derived from the efforts of others, basically. So was there an investment of money? Yeah, I don't think anybody's going to contest that. They actually sold some of those pre-mined tokens. Was it an investment of money in a common enterprise? And was there an expectation of profits to be derived solely from the efforts of others? So prongs 2 and 3 here, and of course 3 can be also described as 3 and 4. This is where all the action is going to take place here. Was it a common enterprise, and was there an expectation of profits to be derived solely from the efforts of the promoter or a third party? In this particular case, the court quotes LBRY as saying some pretty damning things. They have quotes that say things like, over the long term, the interests of LBRY and the holders of LBC are aligned. And of course, they're including that quote because it definitely makes it sound like LBRY is saying they're aligned because they're in a common enterprise. Our interests are aligned. That sounds a lot like common enterprise. Then they're quoting the COO as saying, The opportunity is obvious. Buy a bunch of credits, put them away safely, and hope that in 1 to 3 years, we've appreciated even 10% of how much Bitcoin has in the past few years. If our product has the utility we plan, the credits should appreciate accordingly. That definitely looks like someone trying to craft an expectation of profits. That's that final prong, that prong 3. This, by the way, is exactly why you don't want to be the project going around saying, our token is going to produce 6x yields. Our token is going to produce 3x yields. If you're trying not to be a security, then you don't want to help the court to find that that third prong is filled, that expectation of profits thing. If you're going around telling the potential purchasers of those tokens that buying the token is going to result in yields at all, let alone, whatever X yields, you're kind of doing the regulator's job for them and proving that the purchaser had an expectation of profits, fulfilling that prong 3. You might still be worried about that last part of the final prong. So it has to be expectation of profits derived solely from the efforts of others. Well, the court has a quote from LBRY that kind of does all of the SEC's work on that piece as well. The long-term value proposition of LBRY is dependent on our team staying focused on the task at hand, building this thing. That's almost the perfect language. The SEC probably couldn't ask for a better quote from LBRY to prove out that last piece, that the expectation of profits was on the efforts of others, solely on the efforts of others. This is like the perfect quote for that. Now the court comes to LBRY's response to the SEC, which we can paint with a broad brush and say is basically, this part of it anyways, is basically, we're a utility token. We're certainly not a security. The court says, LBRY's primary response is 2 generally uncontested facts. LBC is a utility token designed for use on the LBRY blockchain, and some unknown number of purchasers of LBC acquired it, at least in part with the intention of using it rather than holding it as an investment. LBRY leaps to the conclusion, based on that LBC cannot be a security, even if LBRY offered it as an investment. LBRY is mistaken about both the facts and the law. Yes, that's right. The courts do not care if you think your token is a utility token, even if it has some utility. They don't care. Down here, they explain, I cannot reject the SEC's contention that LBRY offered LBC as a security simply because some LBC purchases were made with consumptive intent. So they're saying, even if some people bought this thing because they only want to consume it for its utility, that's not going to be enough to defeat the SEC's arguments here. Because were it otherwise, the Securities Act would be unable to adapt to the countless and variable schemes devised by those who seek the use of money of others on the promise of profits. So they know they cannot allow this utility token argument, because then everybody who wants to create a securities scheme is just going to give the security some tiny bit of utility. And then they're going to say, it's a utility token, can't be a security. So the court just sort of rejects this utility token argument outright. I mean, it only took them 2 paragraphs, guys. LBRY also tries to make this due process argument that goes like this. Hey, we didn't have fair notice that our offerings were securities because the SEC historically and consistently has focused its guidance as well as its enforcement efforts exclusively on the issuance of digital assets in the context of an ICO. So they're saying, we didn't do an ICO, and previously you just enforced against ICOs, so we didn't have fair notice. I'll spare you with all the details here and just read you their conclusion. While this may be the first time it has been used against an issuer of digital tokens that did not conduct an ICO, LBRY is in no position to claim that it did not receive fair notice that its conduct was unlawful. We won't go into the reasons why, but just know they don't care. The courts do not care if you didn't do an ICO. So circling back around, what we've got is that the court doesn't care if the project thinks it's a utility token, or even that some people bought it just to consume the utility of the token. They don't care about that at all. They also don't care if you never did an ICO. They don't care about that at all. What they care about is whether or not you meet these three prongs of Howey. Was there an investment of money? Well, they sold some tokens. So yeah, there was an investment of money because people paid money for the tokens. Was there a common enterprise? Yeah, there was, because the project told us. Was there an expectation of profits based solely on the efforts of others? Yes, there was, because the project, that's basically the perception that the project crafted, kind of according to the court here. But none of that is the part that should enrage you. The part that is making people really worried and upset right now is this part right here. Even after the court had established, at least in its own mind, that the quotes from the project itself, the language from the project itself, had established the three prongs of Howey in the First Circuit. In other places, you might see it as four prongs. But they did this thing we call dicta. This is where the court gives its opinion, it opines on things it doesn't even need to establish its ruling. It's just giving its opinion. It's like, hey, nobody asked us, but also here's our opinion on this thing. And dicta is generally not binding precedent, right? They're just kind of offering their opinion. Here it is. The problem for LBRY is not just that a reasonable purchaser of LBC would understand that the tokens being offered represented investment opportunities, even if LBRY never said a word about it. So they're saying, yo, that final prong about expectation of profits, that's established, even if LBRY never talked about that. It is that by retaining hundreds of millions of LBC for itself, LBRY was signaling that it was motivated to work tirelessly to improve the value of its blockchain for itself and any LBC purchasers. So they're saying, even if LBRY never said anything, they never tried to use language to craft this expectation of profits, people still would have had this expectation of profits based on the fact that LBRY had retained that pre-mine of LBC, and that signaled to people that LBRY was going to work tirelessly to improve the value of the project for LBRY and for the LBC purchasers. They also say this structure, which any purchaser would understand, would lead purchasers of LBC to expect that they too would profit from their holdings of LBC as a result of LBRY's assiduous efforts. So think about this for a second. We don't necessarily have pre-mines in the proof of stake world because we don't have mining, but every project does exactly the same thing. They retain that 20% or whatever it ends up being of the tokens. It's always in that pie chart in the tokenomics. They retain some portion for themselves, and they're planning on selling that one day. The court here is basically saying, if you do that, that's proving out basically both prongs. It's proving that you're in a joint venture with the retail purchasers, and it's also signaling to them that you're going to work tirelessly to improve the value of the blockchain for yourself and for the retail purchasers, which is satisfying the final prong, an expectation of profits based solely on the efforts of others. So some people like Gabriel Shapiro on Twitter have pointed out that it doesn't make any sense to say that one thing proves both prongs. If one thing can prove both prongs, why have both prongs? But that's the attitude of the court here. Not only did they side with the SEC on whether or not LBC was a security, they even went further than that in dicta and said, even if LBRY hadn't said all these things, which proved your case, SEC, we would still side basically with the SEC just because of the team tokens or the project tokens, whatever you want to call that non-public portion of tokens that the team retains. This is a huge problem for a giant number of projects in the crypto space. And I'm thinking more of the projects built on top of the base layers, not so much the base layers, but that's still a lot of projects. This is a really bad precedent in the First Circuit for crypto. And this language right here is even worse. This language, this dicta right here is even worse for crypto, but it shouldn't really surprise people. The courts were never going to allow us to do this thing where we figure out a way to get the assets in the hands of the public, and then we keep this slice for ourselves, and then we come back later and we make our money by selling that slice we retained into the secondary markets or OTC. They were never going to allow that, because if they allowed that for crypto, then everybody would use that to escape the securities regulations with every type of security scheme. Everybody would just do that with everything, and it would completely neuter the securities laws. The problem here is not whether or not we should have securities laws. The real problem is that the Howey test is just too old. It's an ancient rule written by a guy who was born before airplanes. Dude was born before airplanes. He couldn't possibly have written a rule that could adapt to 2022. We need a new regime, a new regulatory regime. We need to lay out a bunch of new regulations just for crypto. When I say we need a new regulatory regime, I'm really misusing that term. I'm not saying we need new regulations promulgated by the SEC. That's not what we need. We need Congress to pass a bill. We need them to pass statutory law that the SEC must follow. The other way out of this would be if we had a really big case, maybe even a Supreme Court case, where the justices decided to do the thing they're not really supposed to do, and that's take policy making into their own hands and make a brand new Howey test just for crypto. But until we get a new regulatory regime that's custom tailored just for crypto, projects should really remember these judges, they literally have a two-headed hammer and they use it just like Thor. It's they call it a gavel, but it's just like Thor's Mjolnir. It's exactly the same two-headed hammer. And just like when Thor comes flying through the air to smash things, if these judges rigidly apply Howey like the judge in this case did, those judges are going to take their hammer and they're going to do some smashing on crypto projects. So if you're running a project on Cardano or any other blockchain, be careful out there and make sure you understand the regulatory risk and that the courts, they might not necessarily care what anybody in crypto thinks. In any case, I'll talk to you tomorrow.